Hey everybody, it's Spyros from the Self-Help Photographer. I'm back with another tutorial video. Today, shutter speed. You should remember from before that aperture is one of the two ways that you can let light into the camera. The shutter is the other way. And the shutter speed is how long the shutter is open. That's pretty simple, isn't it? And shutter speed has one main impact on your photos. It controls how motion appears. Now you might just be thinking, give me a fast shutter speed. I don't want any of this slow junk. We even talked about how Aperture and ISO allow you to get faster shutter speeds in low light. But fast shutter speeds aren't all they're cracked up to be. In fact, you can do some really cool stuff with slow shutter speeds. But before we do that, let's figure out how to read the shutter speed on our cameras. Your shutter speed is measured in seconds, and most of these shutter speeds are actually going to be fractions of a second, which is pretty quick. The camera doesn't always make that clear to you, so let's see what these numbers actually look like. Now, you might see a number that looks like this. That is the fraction expressed as a fraction. That's easy to read, 1/5 of a second. And you'd probably see a number that looks like this. That's just 5. That is also 1/5 of a second. Imagine it as a 1 and a bar over the top of that 5, 1/5. Now, everybody on their camera will see a number that looks like this. Those hash marks, that is a decimal point. So this is 0.5 seconds. Why didn't they just use a decimal point? I really have no idea. But the reason we have goofy numbers like 0.5 seconds is so that we can change our shutter speed in 1/3 stop increments. And what's a stop? It's a measurement increment. One stop is the amount of change in light. And a one-stop change is either doubling the light or cutting it in half. So with shutter speed, when you go to a faster shutter speed, you are letting in less light. 3 clicks lets in half as much light. That's faster. 3 clicks in the other direction is going to be a slower shutter speed. That means you're going to get more light and more motion. Changing shutter speed on our camera is just like changing the aperture on a camera. Instead of being in aperture priority mode though, you want to go into shutter priority mode. On your mode dial, this is TV or S. Now, if you spin your jog dial, you should be able to find your fastest shutter speed and your slowest shutter speed. And your fastest is probably around 1/4000th of a second, and your slowest is probably 30 seconds. Okay, let's look at some examples of different shutter speed shots and what motion looks like in our pictures. We'll start with a fast shutter speed. This is what it looks like when you freeze the motion in place. You can see the droplets of the water and the way the energy of that waterfall is transferred by freezing the motion. And this next one here shows energy in a different way. You see how a slower shutter speed was used to capture the traveling motion of that ride. This next one is a motion technique called panning. And what you do is as you're taking the picture with the camera, you use a long shutter speed and you take the picture and you follow the object that's moving. Now this one here is one of my favorites. What I did with this is at the fireworks, I set a nice long shutter speed, and as they're exploding in the sky, I moved my camera all around, getting this really cool effect. But let's be real about it. Sometimes we do want fast shutter speeds. We do want sharp pictures. This is important too. So you might be wondering, when will motion show up in my pictures? What shutter speed is too slow? What shutter speed is just fast enough? There are 2 things you need to know about this. The first is that generally speaking, motion starts to show up at about 1/30th of a second. So if you're higher than 1/30th, say 1/40th, 1/50th or higher, you will have a sharp picture. The second thing you need to know is that the slowest shutter speed you can safely shoot is dependent on the focal length of your lens. The reason is this: the longer the lens, the more your body's natural vibrations will telegraph and show up through that lens. See how as the pen is vibrating, at the longer end you get much more motion than at the shorter end? This is what happens when you're holding your camera. So with your lens, the slowest shutter speed you can safely shoot is 1 over the focal length. For the lens I'm using on my camera right now, it's 1/50th of a second. It's a 50mm lens. If you have a 300mm zoom lens, that's 1/300th of a second. Alright, that's all I got for you today. So let's do a quick wrap up. Number 1, shutter speed is the second way you let light into the camera. Number 2, it also controls how motion appears in your image. Number 3, you'll get some funny looking numbers, but they measure in fractions of a second. So just remember how to read those. Number 4, slow shutter speeds can be very cool. Number 5, motion generally appears around 1/30th of a second, but it also depends on the focal length of your lens. And number 6, have fun. Now, hit me up on Facebook or Twitter if you have any questions, and get out there and take some damn pictures. See you guys next time.